Chapter 19. When Blaine woke up, he looked over at Dylan, who was still sleeping, and the enormity of his new life descended on him. God, he whispered in his heart, how am I ever going to do this? How can I raise Dylan by myself? I'm not ready to be a father. Why? Why did you have to take her? Why did she have to fall apart like that? Didn't she know how much I needed her? How much I still need her? And then he became aware that he was being watched. He let his head fall to the side where he found the little dark eyes gazing at him. There was no fear there, only peace. Blaine knew with one look that Dylan had forgotten. Hey, buddy, how'd you sleep? Dylan nodded, still looking at him in a way that was making Blaine more concerned by the second. What's wrong? I saw Mom. The statement sent Blaine backward like a punch. Dylan, Mom's... I know, but I saw her. She was all dirty and sad at first, and then this angel came into the room. Mom looked at the angel, and as she stood there, all the bad stuff started, disappearing from her. And then she wasn't dirty anymore, and the angel put this really white robe on her, and Mom was happy again. She was happy, Blaine. She looked right at me, and she smiled. She's okay now. Dylan. Blaine reached over to his brother. She's okay, Blaine. She's really okay. I know she is. As he collected his brother in his arms, the only thing Blaine could think was he wished he could have been there to see it. I know she is, too. There wasn't much of a service. The funeral director read something from what Blaine could only surmise was the Bible, and then a lady sang Amazing Grace. He couldn't sing, so he just sat, holding on to Melody's hand. And then it was over. The graveyard wasn't much different. In no time, it was all over, and they were leaving. All day long, Melody kept watch over him and Dylan, and their friends kept watch over all of them. Back at Melody's house, the mood was still quiet, but not as somber as before. AJ and Jeff dug into Melody's video games. From that point on, it was Dylan against whoever was the latest challenger. Blaine never played. He just sat back and watched Dylan and wondered. He tried to think what tomorrow was, tried to remember even what day today was. It wasn't until Eve came and sat by him that he found a good clue. She put her hand on his knee. How are you doing? At first he tried to consider and reason out that question. Finally, he just shrugged. Okay, I guess. Nodding, she looked over at him. I talked to Melody before. We were wondering if you guys would like to come to church with us tomorrow. She held up her hands. No pressure. Her gaze fell. I just know how much that helped me when Dustin died. For the first time since he'd learned about her loss, he had a real appreciation for the depth of her strength and her faith to find a way to keep going after her world fell apart. He nodded. I think that would be a good idea. And so, the next morning, the three of them showed up once again at St. Mark's. Hand in hand, they entered and found AJ and Eve with little trouble. Every so often, Melody glanced over at Blaine. She still didn't know what to say or how to say it, but like her mother had said, she was there, and she wasn't leaving. They all exchanged greetings and then went in together. As Melody walked behind Eve, she suddenly sensed that something had changed. Exactly what that was, she couldn't tell, but she no longer thought of the tall, leggy woman with the long, dark hair as an enemy. She was beginning to appreciate the looks that AJ gave his wife, the way they clung together no matter the storm. Somehow, her heart had come to no longer want him, but to want what they had, a love that was strong, a love that could withstand whatever the world threw at them. She turned her gaze from them to Blaine, and with everything in her, she didn't want that with just anyone anymore. She wanted it with him, with Blaine Donovan, her hero and her best friend. Feeling that to the depths of her soul, she squeezed his hand, and he looked at her in surprise. Gently, she smiled, and his smile back was almost not sad. Had they been at the movies, she would have laid her head on his shoulder. However, that was a bit presumptuous sitting in the middle of a church. So she simply let her gaze trace to the front as the service started. In her heart, she knew there was no telling today what part of the service might change how she saw everything about everything, but she was determined to be awake and alert when that moment came. The only thing Blaine wanted to do was put his arm around her and hold her close. Of course, that would have been awkward because his other arm was already around Dylan, who was huddled up next to him. Still, he wanted to. He had come to want to protect her and love her as much as she had loved and protected him. As the preacher stepped to the podium, Blaine shifted slightly. Strange how listening and learning had become so important in the last couple of months. Strange how before that, he was trying only to get to the next minute in one piece. Now he was paying attention to the lessons of this minute, and he had never known there were so many. He had learned so many this past week. His heart panged at the thought of his mother. This time last week, she was alive. She was here, and she was alive. And now she wasn't. It was hard to figure out why that was so hard to figure out. It just didn't feel right that she was somehow here, then, and gone, now. It just didn't feel possible, and yet it was. It had to be because he knew it to be true. How it was true, though, he still had no idea. A man sat up one night, counting the grain in his barns, the preacher said. He had his calculator there and his ledger. He added and re-added, and then he had a thought. I have had excellent years the last 2 years. What I need to do is build bigger barns so that next year when I plant more, I will have more storage for the harvest. So the next day, he called his contractor. I want to tear down my barns and build 3, double their size. Double? The contractor asked. Whatever will you do with so much space? Fill it, of course. And so the contractor came, tore down the old barns, and began to build the new ones. As the barns were being built, the rich man set about his own work, double time. He added and re-added in his head just how much he would have to harvest to fill those barns. For why have them if he couldn't use them? The barns neared completion, and the harvest did as well. Then, one night, the rich man sat back, looking out at the new barns and anticipating the coming harvest. His wife came in and told him she was lonely, but he brushed her off. There would be time for that when the barns were filled. His child came in for a good-night hug and wanting him to read a story. The rich man rebuffed him also. Soon they would have enough money to buy many more books than any other child in the land, and he knew that then his child would really love him. So he told the child, tomorrow, later, not right now. The child went away sad, and the wife went to bed alone. And that night, the rich man bent over his calculator and ledger and died. Blaine shifted in his seat. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't read his Bible since before the world stopped spinning, before he'd turned on that street and everything in his life had changed and worse. This story was brand new to him. He'd never heard it before that he could remember. However, now the feeling that everyone else was staring right at him drilled into his consciousness. They must be, for this was his story, his life. Now, when the man died, his colleagues from the business world showed up, and the contractor showed up. They all praised the man for his success at raising and trading grain. They said what a success he had been, what a role model in how to operate a business. And his wife and his child listened to the words, thinking they wished he had been a little less successful to the outside world and a little more available in theirs. Everyone said how nice it was that they would be well taken care of because the rich man had prepared so well for his death. But had he? Had he prepared well for his death? This man, this wealthy man had gone full bore for the things of this earth. Wealth, status, success. Building even bigger, ever better, ever more. And yet, what did all that get him when he stood at the threshold of his eternity? What did he take with him? Did he take the barns? No. They still stood, not quite finished, and still empty. Did he take the harvest? No. It was still in the field, now left for someone else to gather. Did he take the love he had given his wife and child and the love they had given him in return? Yes, and that's all he took, although that was a pittance compared with what it could have been. Jesus calls this man a fool, not malicious, not devious, but certainly not a success. He called him a fool. Why? Because in pursuing the temporary, this man, this rich, rich man, had squandered the eternal. He had squandered the truly important for the merely urgent. He got the point of life just backward, just as the world does. The world says that success is everything. But the Bible says, what profits a man if he gains the whole world, but in the end he loses his own soul? What profits a man if he gets the new account, climbs the ladder, gets the promotion, at the expense of his family and his friends and his God? What profits a man if he gains everything, but loses himself? You see, life is really pretty simple. It's just a whole series of decisions, big and small. Decision after decision after decision. But do we ever ask where these decisions, these tiny, in-the-minute decisions, are leading us? Are they leading us anywhere we really want to go? Many of us approach our lives like a DC-10 bound for somewhere. We get on, and when we're in the air, the captain comes on the intercom. "This is your captain speaking. We just flew over Hawaii. We are still over the ocean somewhere. We plan to keep flying until we see some land. Then we'll look for a lot of lights all bunched together, and if we have enough fuel, we will try to land there and figure out where we are at that point." People laughed. Or we go the other direction and set all kinds of goals. I know people who would go into cardiac arrest if they lose their day planner. Why? Because they've completely lost sight of how to simply live in the moment. They treat life like one giant rush to one appointment after another. They have fallen for the lie that somehow, by organizing every moment, they can somehow gain control over that which is not theirs to control. They set goal after goal after goal. For their work, their home, their families, their vacations even. When a friend calls, they try to get off the phone as quickly as possible because this call is messing up my carefully crafted schedule. I mean, their carefully crafted schedule. This round of laughter was a little more self-conscious, a little more nervous. Is it good to have some goals? Yes, if those goals are ultimately focused not on the temporary, but on the eternal. As St. Paul reminds us in 2 Corinthians, therefore, we are not discouraged. Rather, although our outer self is wasting away, our inner self is being renewed day by day. For this momentary light affliction is producing for us an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison, as we look not to what is seen, but to what is unseen. For what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. What he's saying is peg your life to the eternal, not to the temporary. Peg your life not to the barns and to the harvest, but to the people you could love if you took the time. Not to your success, but to your soul. Not to goals and ambition, but to love. Make the right things important in your life, and whether you have 10 minutes or 10,000 days, you will know that you are in fact headed toward the right goal, not just floating around somewhere in the sky hoping to land in a good place before you run out of fuel. The preacher paused. Let us pray. Blaine bowed his head as his heart pitched and arched in 100 different directions. How long had he been focusing on the temporary? Forever? At the time, he thought that's all there was. But looking at his mother's life as he did now, he realized that she hadn't taken a single thing with her. Not a single one. Not even him or Dylan. She had her soul, and that was it. And one day, he would only have his soul. He closed his eyes as the service continued, and although he knew he was making progress, he knew without a doubt how shriveled and pitiful his soul had become. It was cold, selfish, and hard. He had paid nearly no attention to it at all for 27 years, choosing instead to focus on the things that could get him somewhere in this life: money, education, contacts. Now, he didn't even want to think about those things. How much did they really matter anyway? Not much, if at all. They couldn't hold him on a cold night. They couldn't comfort him and encourage him. They couldn't even make his life feel like it was worth living for more than fleeting moments at a time. When his time came, he wouldn't take his car, his clothes, or his bank account. He would take his soul, and at the moment, that was a very scary proposition. He vowed to ask Eve about it as soon as there was a chance. How to get his soul right. How to start living for the eternal rather than the temporary. It seemed so important now. Before he knew it, the service was over, and the 5 of them were headed back out of the bench. Blaine looked at Melody, and strangely, she looked different to him. She looked older, more mature, and more like someone he wanted to spend his life with, rather than just some girl he happened to go out with once. His thoughts turned to his mother. He was still mad at her for so much, but for his soul's sake, he knew he had to find a way to let go of that. Love is what lasts. He'd read that in the Bible Eve gave him, and now he saw even that gift in a different light. She wasn't trying to force something on him. She was showing him how to love by simply loving him. His attention came back to the room as he put his arm around Melody. They trekked out of the church together. "So, what are you all up to now?" Eve asked, clearly measuring her words carefully. "Back home, I guess," Melody said, glancing at him for confirmation. "Well, we're headed over to Lisa and Jeff's," AJ said. "They said you're welcome to come if you want." "Oh, I don't know," Melody said, hesitating for him. But Blaine knew now that the invitation was about their friendship. It was made out of love, not obligation. It was amazing how different that felt. "We'd love to." He smiled at Melody when she looked at him questioningly.
"I want to go with AJ,
Dylan said, pinballing between the 4 of them. Blaine laughed and looked at them. He saw Eve's soft smile. "Well, that's up to AJ." One look and Blaine knew the answer. However, AJ put his hands up in front of his face as if to shield himself from the horror. "No, not Dylan. No, please." Dylan took the bait and threw a flying tackle at AJ, who barely caught him. Eve laughed. "I think that's a yes." "Penny for your thoughts," Melody said as the 2 of them drove to Lisa and Jeff's. "Oh, I don't know. I think you're going to have to spend more than that. I'm not sure a penny can do it justice." Her gaze drifted from the passenger seat over to his profile. "How's that?" He took a breath to figure out where to even start. Then he reached over and took her hand. "Everything. It's just everything, you know? I mean, I've lived 27 years. I thought I had it all figured out, and now I think I've completely missed the point of all of it. I've been so focused on my future, on what I'll be able to do when I'm out of school, what my life will be like in 10 years, what I'll be able to buy, what I'll be able to own, who I'll be, how I'll be, who I'll know, and who'll know me. So much so that I think I completely lost sight of everything that's really important, if I ever saw it at all." She smiled softly. "You saw it. You did. It's not like all of that's been about you." "Yeah, but too much of it was. Dang, Mel, do you know how many barns I've built? How many I've planned? I've been building them and planning for more barns and more barns and more barns." He took a breath. "Sometimes I wonder if that's what my dad did too, you know? If he was so focused on what he was building that he had no time for us." "He made a choice." "Yeah, he did. And I'm afraid I'm making the same one." For a single moment, he sat, thinking. I don't want to make that choice. I don't. I saw my dad do it, and then I watched my mom do it in a different way. I just don't want to get to the end and have nothing to show for it, you know? I mean, look who came to Mom's funeral. Not her friends. Mine. That must mean you're doing something right. That's what I mean. This is what I want. I want to go to church with you and then go to our friend's house. I want to be there for them like they were there for me. That feels so real to me right now. Melody nodded. It was weird today. In church, Eve smiled at me, and for the first time, I was actually happy about that. I wasn't so stuck on comparing my life to hers and figuring out who was winning or losing. We just were. That was nice. I really love it that Dylan likes hanging out with them. I think it's good for them and for him. Before, I would have been all panicked about, what will they think? I don't want to intrude. I don't want them to think I can't handle it. I was scared of everything. She didn't say anything for second upon second. Then she let out a soft breath. I threw the pills away. His gaze snapped to hers. What? I did. I threw 'em away the other night. Pitched 'em in the trash. He waited, but she said no more. And I don't know. It's still a struggle. I still don't want to have all that extra weight. But I know you're right. The way I was doing it isn't healthy. I guess I'm trying to figure out a happy medium, something healthy that I can live with. Blaine nodded. Maybe we could go out walking some night when I get off work, or go roller skating. Dylan loved it the other day when y'all went. You mean when he did? All I did was try to keep up. He laughed. But still, that sounds like fun, and it's not expensive. Like that night we went to the park. Okay, I don't recommend cold, greasy chicken, but that was fun. Yeah, it was. He sat, lost in thought as the white stripes slid by them. Have you thought any more about school and what you're going to do in the fall? She hesitated. Well, I was kind of wondering what you were doing. He glanced at her. How's that? Well, I'm assuming Dylan gets out of school at some point during the day. What does he do after school? A flash of the image of the old house panged through him. I don't know. I'll have to get our stuff out before the 1st. He shook his head. I don't even know where we're going to go, but we can't stay there. I'd already decided that even before. The thoughts swirled again. I don't know. Melody knew they had entered a different level, but just how different she couldn't tell. Carefully, she ventured out onto the fragile branch she hoped wouldn't snap. Well, I was going to tell you, I saw a vacancy at an apartment complex not far from my house the other day. Not that I was looking or anything, but a couple years ago when I thought about moving out, I looked at it. They have some nice efficiencies. They're small, but they were pretty reasonable. She shrugged. I just thought maybe if you got something there, I could help out with Dylan when he goes back. I could pick him up from school, or they could drop him off at my house. At least that way he wouldn't be home all evening by himself. An odd look traced across Blaine's face. You were serious about this team thing, weren't you? Her heart was soft and hopeful. Yeah, I was. He considered, and then looked at her. Well, maybe that's not such a bad idea. We do make a pretty good team, if you hadn't noticed. She smiled like a light bulb coming on. Yeah, I'd kind of noticed that. When they got to Lisa and Jeff's, AJ and Eve were already there and inside. Melody met Blaine at the front of the vehicle, and for all the sadness of the week, today felt like a new start. He put his arm around her, and that felt so very right. You know what I think is awesome? She asked as they walked together up the sidewalk slowly. What's that? I love how being real with each other feels. His gaze slid to her. Oh yeah? Yeah. For a long time there, I was trying so hard to impress you so you'd keep me around. He nodded with a laugh, and I was doing everything I could so you would never find out who I really was. We wasted so much time. Hey, we were learning, he said, hugging her to him. I wouldn't call that wasted. Her smile grew. Me either. They rang the doorbell, but Blaine couldn't keep his joy in. He turned and kissed the side of her head. "What was that for?" she asked. "For teaching me what it's like when it's for real." The door snapped open, bringing both gazes to it. "Hey, you made it," Jeff called, seemingly to anyone who happened to be in the neighborhood. "We did," Blaine said. "Come on in." He pushed the door open so they could come in. "Everybody's in the kitchen." Melody trailed Blaine, although his hand never left hers. It was hard to explain how right simply holding her hand felt. "Save some for us," he joked, walking in and seeing the crew seated around the table. Somehow that table looked bigger today than it had the week before. "Hey, you made it," AJ said, swinging his hand to shake Blaine's as if it had been hours. "Eve thought you got lost." "I did not," she said as she put potatoes on Dylan's plate. "I had complete faith in you two." "Uh-huh," AJ retorted. "That's why you kept saying, 'Where'd they go? Are you sure Blaine knows how to get there?'" The pout on Eve's face brought Blaine's heart up with a yank. He pulled Melody in front of him. "Don't worry, I had my good luck charm with me. We weren't getting lost." "Come on," Jeff said, indicating the other two chairs. "Have a seat." Trying not to be obvious, Blaine pulled Melody's chair out and waited for her to sit. "This looks incredible." "Lisa," AJ said, digging himself some more potatoes and gravy. "She's got skills." Eve leaned over to him and patted his legs. "It's food. It's not hard to impress you, babe." "Ha-ha." AJ lifted his chin to her as if he was offended, but she didn't let him be offended for long, as she gave him a quick kiss and then tried to wipe the lipstick off. "I'm sorry," she said, still wiping. "You married a mean wife." "Amen to that," he said. Saying amen, Eve repositioned her napkin on her lap. "Should we say grace?" Melody joined hands with Blaine on one side and AJ on the other. It felt weird to be between them and not feel like she was being pulled apart. Jeff offered a few words, everyone said amen, and life resumed. She had watched the melee for a few minutes when Blaine held the bowl of carrots up to her. Taking a breath, she felt him looking at her, and her gaze caught his. Slightly, almost, without moving, he nodded, and she smiled. She accepted the carrots, looked at them, and her determination to do this the healthy way solidified. Scooping 2 spoonfuls onto her plate, she passed them on to AJ. That same look was on his face. Funny, though, this time she didn't feel judged. Now she just felt loved. They cared. It was easier to put the potatoes on her plate, and still easier to put the salad and the brisket. When she started eating, she took it slow and let herself enjoy the food. The conversation flowed around her, and although twice she noticed Blaine watching her, she felt much less scrutinized than she had on her diet. It was a nice feeling to know he cared, not about her weight, but about her health. "So, Blaine," Jeff said, "what did you say you were studying?" Melody sensed Blaine freeze. She closed her eyes for a second, willing strength into him. "Please, God, show him it's okay to be real." Architectural design," he said slowly. "I'll graduate in December." "Wow," Lisa said, cutting Alex's carrots into teeny-tiny bites. "That's a tough field." There was a breath of a pause, and then Blaine nodded. "Well, I'll only have an associate's, and it's only architecture, you know. It's not like the stuff you guys do." His gaze swept across Jeff and AJ. "It's not putting your life on the line or anything." He stabbed into a piece of meat, his gaze never really coming up again. Her heart panged forward. She saw things, feelings on his face she'd only gotten glimpses of prior to that moment. "Hey, don't knock where you're at," Jeff said, hefting a forkful of potatoes. "That job's important, too. We rely a lot on the designers. A bad design can take a building down faster than a bad crew." The middle of her heart lifted in gratitude for Jeff. Not only did he understand Blaine's pain, he was humble enough to find a reason to lift the younger man up. "I'd never thought about it like that," Melody said, and she really hadn't. "Oh, yeah," Jeff said. "We like designers who think about more than coding a building, those who recognize how important safety is to those who work there, and those first responders that might be called on something. Besides, if you weren't building the buildings, there'd be nothing for us to save." Blaine's gaze came up from his food. And it's not like that's not a gift either, AJ offered from the other side of her, and Melody almost fell off her chair, she spun so fast. Man, I couldn't get past algebra. She held up her fork. I can vouch for that. I think Mrs. Nean passed him just so she wouldn't have to hear him whine anymore. I don't get this. AJ laughed. You have a lot of room to talk. Seems to me I remember someone who always needed my help. Yeah, well, a lot of good that did me. Her laugh relaxed every piece of her, heart, body, and soul. Who knew this could actually be fun? She leaned back over to Blaine. Hey, tell them about that guy, the one that came into Harmon's the other day. What? Oh, that one I was telling you about? Yeah. And with barely a breath, Blaine launched into the story of the guy who wouldn't choose a coat but wouldn't leave. The more exasperated he became telling it, the harder everyone laughed until no one was even eating anymore. I bet he tried on that one coat like 25 times, Blaine said, coming completely out of his sullen shell. No, I want it tailored here, he'd say. Hello, I can't change the style of the coat. What am I supposed to do, snap my fingers or rub some kind of tailor genie lamp? Melody looked at him horrified. What? You're not magic? Do I look like I'm magic? He asked, skepticism reigning through the question. Well, yeah, sometimes. She leaned in to kiss him as catcalls, oohs, and ahs sounded around the table. When Blaine backed up, his ears were pink. Uh-oh, Jeff said, watching them with a huge Cheshire cat grin. What, uh-oh? Lisa asked. That was cute. That was not cute, AJ said seriously. That was the sound of the trap snapping shut. Jeff pointed his fork at AJ. You got that right. Lisa's face fell into a frown. You guys are so paranoid about us laying the traps for you to fall into. You don't? Jeff asked, clearly sounding surprised. As I recall, I was walking along, minding my own business. And what was I doing, ensnaring you in my evil web? Lisa asked incredulously. Jeff nodded. Something like that. He looked over at Blaine. Be afraid. Be very afraid. Blaine laughed. I'll try to remember that. Who's up for some dessert? Lisa asked when the laughter died down. Moans and groans plodded around the table. It's cheesecake. Jeff shook his head at AJ. You guys have got to stop coming over. I'm not going to be able to climb that ladder anymore if this keeps up. She's nesting, Eve said, patting Jeff on the wrist. Just wait. When that little one gets here, she'll be too busy with round-the-clock feedings to worry about if you've eaten or not. He looked at her and corkscrewed his face. Isn't there some kind of happy medium there? There is no such thing, AJ shook his head. Trust me on that one. Lisa set the cheesecake right in the middle of the table, and panic swept through Melody. Sugar. Lots of it. The meal was delicious, although she'd only eaten half of what everyone else had. But now, how to get through this issue? If she said she didn't want any, AJ was sure to give her that look. If she took some, wasn't that being unhealthy? She hated these moments. I'm stuffed, Blaine said from next to her. But that really looks good. He leaned over to her. How about we split a piece? When Melody looked at him, her heart burst with gratitude. Without embarrassing her or calling attention to her, he'd taken the initiative to save her from the humiliation of the moment. Lisa handed him the dish with the cheesecake and looked at Melody. Are you sure you don't want some? No, this is fine. But to Melody, it was better than fine. It was the best fine she'd ever experienced. She took a small bite, and savoring wasn't even the word. It tasted like velvet heaven. Wow, Lisa, did you make this? It's incredible. I wish, Lisa said. Eve brought it. When Melody's gaze snapped over to Eve, she could have sworn she saw Eve shake her head as if deflecting the compliment. Eve's gaze fell to her own plate as she cut the tiniest sliver off. Softness wafted over Melody's spirit for this woman. She might have everything, but it was abundantly clear to Melody, in that moment, that Eve was as vulnerable as the rest of them. "This really is good, Eve. Did you make it from scratch?" Never would Melody have been able to explain what she saw rush through Eve's dark gaze when she looked up. Surprise, hope, gratefulness. They were all there. "Yeah, it's my mom's recipe." And her gaze fell again. It was at that moment that Melody realized how utterly unfair she had been to Eve. Eve had never done anything but be nice to her, and she had spent the better part of 2 years trashing every attempt Eve made at being friends. It was time that stopped. "Well, it's awesome. If it's not some super family secret, I'd love to get the recipe from you sometime. Cheesecake is my mom's favorite, and she would love this." Sincere happiness wafted through Eve's gaze this time when she looked at Melody, and a true connection was formed. "It's really easy. I can write it down for you if you want." "That would be great." Melody met Eve's smile with one of her own. 2 more bites, and their cheesecake was gone. Another 2 minutes, and so was everyone else's. Blaine pushed the little plate away, sat back, and laid his arm over the back of her chair. "That was too good." "You can say that again," AJ said from her other side. "Now it's time for a nap and some baseball." The women looked at him skeptically. "In what order?" Eve asked. "TV on, baseball found, lay down on the couch, zzz." He put his hands out and his head back like he was sound asleep. "See, I always said baseball is the most boring sport ever," Lisa said. "Nope," Eve offered. "It cannot be worse than golf." She grabbed the spoon and set a serious look on her face. "Tiger lines up the putt. It's a difficult lie." AJ grabbed the spoon from her. "Like I even watch golf." She grew indignant. "You did that one day, and when I came in and changed it, you said—" Both she and Lisa said simultaneously, "Hey, I was watching that." "See what you have to look forward to?" Eve said to Melody. "See, like this, they look so awake and alert. But you put a ring on their finger, and it's Snooze City." A ring? Where did that word come from? It sounded so official. She wondered at that moment if he would ever give her a ring, if that could ever really be an actual possibility. "And on that note," Jeff said, standing. He grabbed for dishes, and everyone else followed. Blaine had never been around so much activity in all his life, save for the parties he only barely recalled. Even over the days of the funeral, it was the women who cooked and cleaned. Now he was part of the action as well, and it felt great. He laughed, he joked, he even kissed Melody twice on the sly. He was glad to see she was eating again, and he couldn't help but see the effect Dylan was having on Eve and AJ. It was like he was their surrogate child, and Blaine couldn't help but think he was as good for them as they were for him. When the dishes were cleaned and everybody headed for the living room, he realized with a start that it was Sunday afternoon. Tomorrow, somehow he had to catch back on to the world of work and school and problems so big he never wanted to think about them again. And one of the first staring at him was a mountain of homework. He was so behind he would probably never catch up. "What?" Melody asked, seeing the fun fall from his demeanor. Blaine exhaled. He hated pulling her down with him. "Blaine Donovan." She put her hands on her hips. "Don't you do that. What?" He glanced toward the living room. "It's just, well, I have a lot to read and—" An infinitesimal moment of interpretation, and she nodded. "Then we need to go." However, he touched her arm. "I hate to make you go. You're having fun." Her smile was soft. "We do what's good for the team, remember?" Love, so tender it hurt, skidded across his heart. He pulled her into his arms and pulled in air and what it felt like to be loved. "You're awesome, you know that?" "I'm only following your lead." This has been For Real, Book 3, The Courage Series, written by Staci Stallings, narrated by Becky Dowdy. Copyright 2012 by Staci Stallings, Production copyright 2014 by Staci Stallings.
Like and subscribe to the Staci Stallings YouTube channel so you never miss a second of the story.